Welcome, welcome, welcome. Good morning. I'm Mira Rubin. Welcome to the Core Connection. And today's topic is collaborative leadership. And we get to examine our notions of leadership and how our traditional notion of leadership is sort of rooted in some stereotypical gender-based roles, and um, it should be an interesting conversation to examine some of our maybe invisible ideas around leadership, and then we'll look at how we can step into a new paradigm around it such that we develop a more collaborative model. So before we get started, let's take a minute or two to get present. Let's take a deep breath in through your nose and hold it. And imagine clean, crisp oxygen flooding your lungs, flowing into your bloodstream, nourishing all your cells, all your organs, bringing vital life energy to your body and being. And as you exhale any tension, stress, negativity, fatigue. And now let's take another deep breath in through your nose and hold it. And this time, imagine brilliant, bright light lighting you up from the inside out, illuminating, electrifying, and energizing all your cells, all your molecules, your electrons, creating a brilliant beam of light and energy from your heart out into the world. And as you exhale any remaining tension, stress, negativity, fatigue. And now let's press our palms together. Vigorously rub your hands together. Feel the friction, the pressure, the motion, the temperature, and the tickling and tingling when you stop. Allow all those sensations to bring you present right here, right now, into this remarkable physical form that enables you to experience life. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Good morning, Rosalind. Welcome. So good to have you here with us this morning. And welcome to everyone else who's joining us. It's great to be here with you and to be looking at this notion of leadership and what collaborative leadership might look like. So I just started reading this wonderful book called Nature, Culture, and the Sacred. A Woman Listens for Leadership. And it's by Nina Simons, who is one of the co-founders of Bioneers, which is this wonderful venue for new ideas, sustainability-oriented thinking, and connection with ourselves, our planet, each other, all those good things. And it made me think, because she talks directly about notions of leadership and how in many ways our standard notions of leadership are very, very masculine. You know, they're very much about leading the charge and going to war kind of thing, and being strong and being all-knowing, and power, a lot about power and kind of an spoken or unspoken domination. And I may be paraphrasing incorrectly. This is my take on the conversation. And you know, when we think about the traditional leader is unflappable and strong and confident and bold, and that leadership looks like standing out in front of the crowd leading everybody. And I think that there's tremendous power and in looking at how we can bring more humanness, more femininity, or the stereotypically feminine characteristics into our leadership. So Rosalind says leadership in the place is empowering, in the workplace is empowering others' strengths. I haven't seen it done well in the workplace. Yeah, yeah. So interestingly, Rosalind says, so then if I have no example, do I be that for others? Yes, yes. Well, see, that's leadership. So, there's leadership that's like out in front, pulling people behind you. There's also leadership that's arm in arm, that's collaborative, that is, rather than based in confidence and knowing, maybe based in a deeper sense of connection and intuition. We have this idea of the leader as standing out from the crowd. Well, what about the leader being connected? What about sourcing our intuition? So one of the things that Nina says in her book, she talks about how when she was younger, she was leading in this very masculine prototype, essentially, just trying to be unassailable, unflappable. And as a result, denying the things that allow her, that are some of her greatest strengths, as I think this is the case for so many of us, our intuition, our sense of connection, our deep listening, our ability to be present in a very deep way, to be able to lead through connection, to lead through example, to lead through vulnerability rather than impervious strength. And as we think more about this notion of leadership, we're all being called into leadership. It doesn't mean leading the charge. It means in so many ways following the calls of our heart and our soul, being in alignment, finding alignment, being willing and to question, to be present to the not knowing, to be in a mode of collective discovery. So I've spoken before about Carol Sanford and how she's a thought leader. She hates that term because of this whole, I'm presuming partly because of the whole predisposition to what we believe leaders to be. But Carol is anti-expert, which is, also part of this expert notion, this notion of the supremacy of experts, or the infallibility of experts, is also part of this old paradigm, this domination and control sort of paradigm. Well, I'm the expert, so I know better, and therefore you can't contribute to my knowledge, or my knowledge is impeccable. Where when we give ourselves permission to be in the inquiry, to be discovering, to be exploring, then we rise together. So this is the notion that we get to look at, is people want to follow a charismatic leader, right? The thing is that when we do that, there's often an inclination to absolve ourselves of responsibility, to kind of give away our accountability, to give away our own authority, our own capacity to think, to observe, to explore, to discover. And as I'm considering this, thinking about leadership, as leaders, we are able to provide perhaps support or a venue. Like it was interesting because she was talking about these women, herself included, who had been designated as leaders or had been called out as leaders, and each of them were uncomfortable with that notion. Why? Because the notion of leadership that we are indoctrinated to is this very patriarchal, power-oriented, domination-oriented kind of model. And one of the examples that she gives is the leadership of a parent. You know, that as parents, we shape our children. You know, we influence our children deeply and provide them with some guidance. So, you know, I think that there's a distinction if we think about the gender-based stereotype thing here. You know, there's direction versus guidance. You know, to give someone direction, to be directive, that's sort of the old paradigm of leadership. To provide guidance or guideposts or feedback, or, you know, there's a respect that is inherent in that guidance versus direction. Respect for the capacity of the person being guided. You know, being led is kind of like being led on a tether, right? I think that this is a qualitative difference, because I was just thinking about, for instance, going on a trail through the jungle, a jungle that's unfamiliar. You could have someone leading the way, but usually those people are called guides, right? And they are familiar and they can help us to navigate the trail that we're walking, right? For our personal journey, and they're helping to hopefully guide us through in a way that is safe, or that is informed, but not, you know, like somebody could be our areas of expertise are limited, and also when we are considered an expert, then there's the notion that we wouldn't learn more, or that there's not room to learn more. We might have a greater degree of knowledge about something than another person does, and hopefully we are not resting in our expertise, that we are continuing in our journey of discovery. So Rosalind says, tactful information that is relevant and guiding at the same time. Yeah, and you know, I think uh, the notion is the difference between it's authority versus partnership, maybe, um, guidance versus direction. Um, it's an interesting thought. And as we expand this notion of leadership, we can recognize that we are all leading at different times in different circumstances. And what does that entail? And what does it look like to own that, to own our engagement? Um, I'm just thinking the game, follow the leader, right? You know, or what is the game? Simon Says, right? Simon says, put your hands on your head. Simon Says, smile. Simon Says, jump up and down, sit down. You know, if you sit down without Simon Says, you're not following the leader. And I just think it's interesting how we get very caught up in a lack of consciousness in following certain leaders, whether they be social media influencers or politicians. It's kind of like Simon doesn't have to say Simon Says anymore for you to follow what Simon's saying. And what that shows is how we go on automatic pilot, and we stop being present, and we stop really listening, and we stop really hearing. And perhaps the greatest guidance for leadership that we can receive, or the greatest leadership that we can receive, is connection through that guidance that we have access to within ourselves when we are in alignment. And I'm not talking about our reactive selves, but there's a place of presence. There's leadership in being a witness, you know, being a witness to the experience of another, being witness to someone presencing them, presencing yourself, and thereby allowing their presence to blossom even more fully. And so as we challenge some of these notions of leadership, it doesn't mean the person who's screaming the loudest, right? It doesn't mean so many of the things that we have grown up to believe, and yet many of us fall sway to leaders that lead us astray, right? Or leaders who have lost their way. And so there are a couple points here. One is to recognize our own leadership, our own sovereignty in making choices for our lives, and our capacity to make choices that are awakened to our alignment, that are present to an essential part of our being, living in accord with those with the clarity of that alignment is a powerful thing. We tend to give, you know, it's so interesting. I was also listening to somebody who was being interviewed, who was a QAnon supporter, and talking about what they believed about the state of the world. And I, here I am talking about being aligned with our beliefs, or not just our beliefs, but within our essence, which is really on a whole different level. And here's somebody who has absolute conviction that we're living in a movie that is being orchestrated, where the things that look real are not real, and the world is kind of upside down, and their experience is that that's truth. So, when I talk about alignment with our own inner leadership, that kind of thing comes to mind too. And that's a little scary. It's a little scary to recognize that that's also the result of a very twisted form of leadership that people have then allowed themselves to be swayed by. It's really quite quite boggling that we can become so separated from ourselves, from each other. And anyway, let's bring it back to you and your leadership. Leadership is taking appropriate action, right? Leadership is being present, even though sometimes it's hard to be facing what's there. I think we get to question these things, question our assumptions around leadership. We are often, especially as women, inclined to say somebody else is the leader, rather than taking the responsibility, not to necessarily rally the troops, right? That's sort of a different perspective. But how about creating community? How about creating a network? There's leadership in that. There's leadership in collaboration and living aligned to values. And it doesn't have to be something that is accompanied by fanfare or even great recognition. It's not, you don't even necessarily, there are many people who are leading who are not acknowledged as leaders. Just look at parenting within a family, teachers within an educational system, potentially. All of us have the capacity to be leaders when we are not considering that leadership is a greater than, less than kind of proposition. That we can be arm in arm and create change, create example, create connection. And what if we were to redefine leadership as connection rather than domination and control? And April, hi, welcome. So good to have you here with us. So April says leadership, lead your ship, steer your ship the direction you want it to go. I never heard that, April. That's beautiful. I love it. That's essentially what we're talking about. That I love it. Thank you so much for that. And thank you all for joining us and for having the willingness to think different. to explore some of the invisible biases we might have, to be willing to entertain new ideas, and to question those things that may have previously been invisible. So with that, I'm Mira Rubin. This is the Core Connection, and I go live here each weekday morning on the Enlightened World Network Facebook page and YouTube channel. And I invite you to check out the awesome programming on Enlightened World Network and Enlightened World Living Facebook pages. And I think I said I go live here each weekday morning at 9 a.m. Eastern. And until next time, so much love to you.